is Make Your Dreams Concrete, Sherri Warner Hunter.
Yes.
Yep,
Um,
we see you.
Byline I've had from the start. And I want to thank you for inviting me. One of the things I wanted to share with you is that, in fact, my creative journey actually started not too far from where you're sitting right now. I was raised outside of Philadelphia and graduated from Downingtown High School. Our parents were creative and encouraged any of our artistic adventures. I also had a junior high art teacher who remained a fabulous mentor through my school years, helping me to get into the Pennsylvania Governor's School one summer and taking me to art college interviews the next. And that was my childhood house. My choice was to go to an art college rather than a university. I ended up at the Kansas City Art Institute, just positive I was going to be a painter. After my freshman year in foundations, I had cemented my love, yes, pun intended, for
Hmm.
creating three-dimensional artworks and majored in sculpture with a minor in drawing. After graduating from KCAI, I moved to California. There are a lot of challenges, but I was fortunate enough to make some good contacts in the art community. I also helped set up two art galleries for investors that focused on contemporary crafts. Ultimately went to grad school and received my MA, my master's. What happens is I'm basically, after a few years in California, was invited back to KCAI to teach a foundation workshop. And there I met Martin. But while I was there, I also ended up getting entrenched in arts administration and then sadly retail. Fortunately, Martin got a new job and we were moving to Nashville. But with the understanding that we were moving for my job too, and I finally got back to refocusing on my artwork. Before moving to Nashville, I hadn't touched concrete or even thought about mosaics. With 2020 hindsight, I credit the culture of the sculpture department for having a big effect on my commission journey. The chairman expected big work from the male students. He created big works and was a great storyteller. I remember him talking about concrete lips he had made for a set design for the Kansas City Ballet. They had to be strong enough to travel and light enough to be lowered and raised. He had used a foam and special concrete system. That little seed. I contacted him about 5 years after graduating from the department to find out more about the process. It's the process I use today and teach. I knew I wanted to get into public art, but I felt that I needed to provide proof that I could do a large scale piece to be able to apply for large scale projects. I'd been accepted to an exhibition at the Arts Commission Gallery and took the opportunity to create the largest piece I could that would fit into the space through their doors. It was the first time I made a scale model and took careful measurements for an installation. Movers I hired were skeptical when they saw the door to the gallery, but I guided them and sections went through successfully. They were so impressed that they stayed and helped assemble the whole piece. This piece was also my first major mosaic attempt. I happened to have a pickup truck at the time and noticed a pile of boxes in the parking lot of a tile store. When I asked what they were doing, they said they were getting ready to take them to the dump. And yes, I could take all that I wanted. I'd already been thinking I wanted to add color to outdoor pieces, but didn't want to paint them. What I didn't know was the difference between interior and exterior tile, or much about adhesives. So after a lot of masking tape and many tubes of goop, the green form got covered in green tile mosaic. We moved to Nashville with the understanding that the next move would be mine. I had an opportunity to work as a studio assistant for a sculptor who did bronze casting, and he introduced me to the small town of Bell Buckle. I had also made a 5-year plan when we first moved to Nashville. I would do everything I could to create a supportive art business. If it didn't work out, I would do art, but do something else on the side to earn money. At 4 years, 11 months, I got my first public art commissions. I took it as a sign. We found some property that happened to have a nice sized pole building on it, and we were moving to Bell Buckle, the suburbs of Bell Buckle, actually, just in time to create this piece in my new studio. Starting out, I took a lot of risks and I made a lot of mistakes. But as time goes on, I appreciate my mistakes as a good source of learning. Making all those mistakes also helped inspire me to write my books. I didn't see any reason why someone else should have to make the same mistakes I did. So my work basically falls into three different categories. I have my personal work, my community work, and my commission work. So I'm going to go through a selection of each of those and show you some of the different processes I've used. So have always considered myself a mixed media artist. And I love working with found objects. So things like sticks or rusty nails that I find in a burn pile or whatever. Anyway, the ring on this one is concrete. I'm able to use the concrete forms that I make and the mosaic as really tools to help me realize pieces. So I know some people are more about the materials and they stay on a material and really investigate it till they continue to discover new things about that material. I know a number of mosaic artists that say that they can't imagine doing anything but mosaic. I use mosaic as a tool, and I also use it to add color to my pieces, both on interior and exterior. I like things to be unexpected, so a lot of my installation systems utilize different types of materials. So this is actually a rubber cord that's used industrially to make O-rings, but I knew it was available, and I like the way these, what I call beads, hang on it. The beads themselves are about 15 inches in diameter, carved styrofoam with the concrete that's been polished in a number of layers. And I like that technique. I like color to be accidental, not so much planned. Again, I don't feel good about applying color. So I like things where accidental coloration occurs. This is a sculpture that's about 20 inches high. And again, a different technique, but using the pique-assiette for her dress, actually a little demi-tasse cup, formed the perfect collar. I've also liked my crows. They appear a lot in my personal work in both sculpture and drawings. This piece is in a collector series. This is number 3. In the base, most of the decoration are different things that I found either in button boxes or mudlarking on the Thames or mother's jewelry box. So it really follows the same kind of reference as memory jugs do in folk art. The branch is faux bois concrete over an armature, and then the bird, of course, is the carved styrofoam with a color enhanced concrete and a lead used to make the beak. Totems are one of my favorite forms, and this one I really wanted to look like it was wonky. It actually is called clowning around. It was done at a period of time when I really was dealing with too many serious things. So I have a particular love for this piece because of the timing and where it brought me in a new series. More recently, this is the juggler. So following in that series, and at some point, I hope maybe there'll be a full circus. I don't know. I don't always do big pieces. These are a series of 6-inch pieces that actually was originally inspired by the 100 moments that SAMA typically holds for their conferences. But these are all pieces that have been picked up through various travels, including Watts Tower, Sagrada Familia, Alana Shafir's studio, and some pieces from commissions I've done. This is Ashkelon Memories, and this was done when I was visiting Alana Shafir, and her daughter took us to the beach and showed us the different things that she would gather for her mother to use in her mosaics. And I brought home way more rocks than anybody should have ever been traveling with, but they are being put to good use, even though this is only 6 by 6. These also came from Ashkelon, and this is the ancients. In my community art, my communities stretch or expand everywhere from it could be an elementary school. I'm involved in 2 projects right now, to a much wider community. This was an installation that was at the Frisk Museum in Nashville. And there were a series of pieces that honored not only individuals, but families, neighborhoods, the idea of family trees, with various workshops that I held throughout the community, and actually finished and worked on the piece within the gallery so people could experience the making process. The flag in the back is made out of over 16,000 flattened bottle caps. The figures roll around and it's called Changing American Family, so that people could reposition the figures to create their concept of family, along with concept of home and recognition of individuals. The mosaic material for this was all donated by community members. I had a trash can, as it were, outside the museum that people could make donations. And then I selected a theme for each of the figures, like what I like to call the teenage girl with attitude, got a lot of the blue and white. In the back, you can't quite see, but a lot of that was broken assortments from the gift shop at the museum. And I refer to her as the art teacher because we all know art teachers have awesome sweaters. The one figure that you can't see in the back is the dad figure, and he has all different kinds of coins from all over the world that are in his tie. With this, it was another community project. So some of my projects allow the individual to really exert their personality. Others, I incorporate their talents to make a larger piece look like one entity had actually created it. So there were over 150 people that worked on this piece, which was created for a nonprofit whose motto is where teens succeed. So not only did we have troubled teens working on it, but we had teens that were striving to obtain leadership roles and help mentor those participants as well. This is an example that's sort of a vehicle that I use quite a bit, where I invite people to make a smaller mosaic along a certain theme, and then that's incorporated into a larger piece that then gets handled in a more specific way, a more controlled way. This was a community piece that holds a special place in my heart. It was for the Mayan Cultural Center in Omaha, Nebraska. I had no idea that Omaha, Nebraska had one of the largest Mayan populations in the US, but they have been taken in by the Omaha tribe. They do a lot of partnering with advocacy, with care processes in terms of taking care of community and programming of indigenous people. So I was asked, I was a member of the Community Built Association, and they wanted me to lead a leadership project, and we created a sculpture that incorporated some of the Mayan symbology. And this was their particular logo. Went through the design process. So some of my pieces require maquettes, others require drawings, but there's always a lot of discussion. My biggest thing about doing a commission and a community piece is really being able to listen. I don't want to just force my idea on somebody. I really want to hear what it is they are looking for and what the function of that piece is supposed to be. The one where the kutzel is not on the corn was the first design. The one with it on the corn was the actual design that we went, because we went ahead and made the base more of a ziggurat pyramid, so it was more in keeping with Mayan culture. I knew I was only going to have 5 days to work with volunteers in Omaha, and started the piece in my studio. Got it to a certain point where I knew that there would be a number of steps that I could engage the community. So that's always a challenge with a community project. You have all these volunteers. You need to make sure that they have a job, because nothing is worse than being a volunteer and not having a job. We had to go to Omaha, so I frequently pack my car like this. In this case, going to Omaha, a lot of times for various workshops around the country. These are some of the wonderful people that worked on that project. Side benefit of this whole project was a local artist in Omaha had volunteered his space for us to work in, and it happened to be Thurman Statham. If any of you are familiar with the glass artist, he has quite the reputation and quite the personality. So it was great seeing all his work around. But we had people from the center there. We had people from the community built. We had people just from the art community in Omaha, which is pretty astounding. And one of the things that really touched my heart was that we didn't quite get it done. This is at the end of the week. There is still more work to be done. But one of the elders of the Mayan community gave it a special blessing. And that it really made it a very special event on so many different levels. The Quetzal did come back to Bell Buckle and it got finished and then it got shipped up there. Unfortunately, I don't have a final installation shot of the project, but it was quite wonderful. There's a lot of lessons learned with my commission pieces, and I am more interested in learning from a project than I am in repeating a piece. So this was a piece that I originally made for the Children's Nashville Vanderbilt Children's Hospital in Nashville, and it was on a sixth floor courtyard. So in order for that to fit there, it had to be constructed in three parts, and I had to measure all the doors from the loading dock all the way to the sixth floor, including elevator doors, heights, every single door, and made every piece so that it would fit through on the elevator and we could get it to that courtyard. There you can see, once we got it up there, we were connected the pieces together, and you can notice those stars that are still freshly grouted, so they're a little bit darker than the other. But the stars in the mosaic actually indicated where the bolting rods that went through the piece to hold it together were, in case I ever had to take it down, not thinking that would really happen, but it did. They decided to do an expansion program, and it did need a little refreshing. So it came back to my studio. And some of you may have seen this when we had the SAMA show in Nashville. When I was organizing those two shows at the Parthenon, the curator said, well, couldn't we have one of your big pieces out front? And I said, yeah, like I have those lying around. And then I said, oh, wait, I do. And Vanderbilt gave me permission to do it again. So to lend it here. So we moved it there. But ultimately, it had to go back to the sixth floor. So when it got taken apart and taken up there, unbeknownst to anyone, they changed the size of the door of the sixth floor courtyard, and she would not fit back in. Well, by the way, her name is Lizzie because she has violet colored eyes. So she now lives in another place and actually is more appreciated by a wider population. So I'm happy about that. But there's always surprises with these pieces. This was a piece I did for the governor's residence in Nashville. The then Democratic governor at the time was doing a major renovation and building a conservation hall for large meeting spaces. The First Lady rescued the slate that was being taken off the roof during the renovation process and invited three artists in Tennessee to make a proposal using the slate. When I delivered my proposal and had my sample boards, they said, well, what is that? And I said, it's the slate. I cut it up, tumbled it in my concrete mixer, divided the colors, and utilized it for the sculpture. I did get the commission. So it's down in the underground meeting room, which is Conservation Hall, and all the different colors that naturally occur in the slate. Originally, I was going to do gold smalty on the bird, but they said, would you mind doing a bronze bird with gold leaf? It's like, sure. So I got to do that's my first public bronze sculpture too. Some of the making process, almost all of my pieces have metal armatures in them to deal with stress, but it doesn't mean all my pieces have metal armature, just where I know there's going to be stress points. So every piece starts out as a blocked piece, and then we start carving. To make anything curvilinear, you have to start taking corners off the block pieces. And once that's done, start working with brushes. I like to start working with brushes and carve things down to get them where I want them. There was the moquette. There's the piece. I work very strongly for my moquettes. For me, it's critical to take that time to do that, as opposed to trying to make all my decisions at a large scale where I have the potential of making larger scale mistakes. I can do a lot of changes on a moquette and work from that and make much smaller mistakes. The issue there became a matter of height. I originally designed her for 9 feet, and they couldn't decide. And they said 6 feet. And I said, well, no, she's called in the presence of presence. So we settled on, well, I don't know if it's a we. I settled on 7.5 feet. all of my big pieces do get rocked and rolled. I don't stand vertically or one should be comfortable when one is mosaicing. It enhances your work time. But these pieces don't always go away. So 2 summers ago, even though they had a maintenance schedule, 10 years had passed and the poor girl never had gotten clean. She had moss on her head. So I got to go back and visit her and clean her. So I guess it's like children. I don't have children, but you think they're gone from the house, but they come back. And the same thing happens with my commissions. I think a lot of you are already familiar with this particular piece. I'm sure it's the largest commission that I'll ever do in my life. This entailed a lot of drawing and making a lot of maquettes. I did have to work with a contractor on part of it. I could have done it. I know I could have done it, but the person who was leading the art program at the hospital wasn't quite sure. So we went with a contractor on the starfish. So this was the starfish. The poor starfish had to travel. It went to Minnesota. It's made in Nashville, in Bell Buckle, went to Minnesota and came back to Nashville to have the mosaic work done on it on both sides. I actually like the bottom the best. Other kinds of armatures that were included in the project. This was a waffle armature. I originally thought it was going to be my type of armature, but the fact that I wanted this piece to rock required bringing in a different type of engineering and engineer so that I could get an armature that withstand the pressure of the rocking back and forth. If it had just been the styrofoam, it would have compressed over time and failed. So they did rock, and they had to because they were rock shrimp. This is them installed. The installation at the hospital was very exciting for me. Not only was it the largest piece that I had ever made, but it required the largest equipment that I had ever rented. So I rented not only the semi truck but the driver as well. I hired art handlers to help me load it in. Then on the other end, they had to unload it with their professionals. And while I had been told I'd be able to drive up to each concrete pad and unload at the pad, that was fake news. Okay, it was not at all ready, but the contractors were dead set on blaming the artist for any delays in construction, and it had nothing to do with that. The fun part was that the starfish had to be loaded in by a crane. You can see that's how rough the location was. And they said it would be basically the last thing that would be done and that my pieces weren't in any danger at all. That wasn't true. Part of the starfish installation with the rock formation, there was a cave. I went to California and worked in the child life room for a couple days and enlisted the pediatric patients there to do drawings of magical underwater creatures. And then we took those back and sized them up and did the mosaic on them so that they would be incorporated permanently in the cave mosaic. There we were putting the mosaic into the cave. My learning curve here was that we had started to do the solid pieces flat, and I went to pick it up one evening to move them and realized that everything was closing in the gaps of the interstices, and realized I had to, in fact, build a form that matched as close as possible the curve of the cave in reverse so we could do the mosaic on that form, and when we cut it off, that it would then fit in the curve of the tunnel. I found out that the only thing that I like less than mosaicing in a tunnel is doing epoxy grout in a tunnel. We were very suited up for that, but I really liked the effect, and I never got to see if it really worked, but I did put the Spectralock Pro Dazzle Day Glow in the grout underneath of there, hoping that there would be some residual light when people were climbing through that. So there's the finished cave, finished starfish. The biggest piece in the installation was a elephant seal, although a lot of people call him a walrus. He's not. The title of the piece was The Rocky Shores. Everything had to live on the rocky shores of California. And the art director had made it so that each layer of the hospital had a different ecosystem depending on the altitude of California and of the layer of the floor in the hospital. So I was on the rocky shores. You can notice a couple different initials on the piece. I do try to incorporate some indication of the fabulous assistance I get in creating these pieces because I couldn't do it myself. So there's a Tiffany Cataldo right there on his shoulder. Also, this piece had to be bolted together. So coming up with another system, well, not another system. Look, it's another star. And that's the same thing that I used on the dragon. So each piece that I've done sort of gives me more information of the next piece, but the next piece has to also challenge what I already know. So there we are finishing in the joint of that piece. And there it is in its finished state. As I said, with my prep for installations, or commissions, I'm either doing maquettes or I'm doing drawings. But with the maquettes, I want them to be as close to what I envision as the actual form. And I'm using that all through my carving process. So they tend to get a little beat up by the end of a project, but I do like them and I hold them and I use them, and they become a reference not only for the form, but also by the time I've painted them, I've also made a lot of decisions on my tile purchases. So here they are in 3 different states, getting mosaicked, and there they are. This is not the finished layout, but the graphic design is mine too. I only wish that the installers would have followed it, but there you go. And Bob was a very special one. He was in my initial proposal. He got axed, and then they did a redesign of the layout of the whole courtyard, which I wasn't consulted on. And all of a sudden they needed another piece. So Bob got added back in. And the reason he's Bob is because my dad lived in Fort Myers, but always went to Sanibel. And going across this causeway, he loved the pelicans. And my dad never got to see the piece or see me work on this piece. So it's named Bob after Dad. And he's there watching over the piece for me. This is the last big commission that I've done. It is one in Tennessee, and it was a gateway entrance to an inclusion park in a county about 3.5 hours away from me. So it was a donor wall on the outside. This one, they did not have the budget for the maquette. So I do want to say that becomes the design fee is something that I'm always considering. So if they have a budget that will allow for maquettes, I like that. But if they don't, then a drawing, measured drawings, maybe mechanical drawing from an engineer is required, which it was on this. Because while the other piece was my biggest piece in real estate, this was the tallest piece I ever made. These are pretty much the same steps that I make for any piece, whether it's a crow or a bench. Blocking out the pieces, incorporating any necessary armature or connecting system, carving with wire brushes. Some are messier than others. Getting the piece out, doing a lot of direct drawing on the pieces. Again, another instance of where I couldn't have done it without the assistance of many hands. As I said, for the gateway, it did require an engineered drawing. Well, they didn't require it. I don't know why. This was a city project. I required it because I did not want any issues to come back afterwards. But it turned out the issues were pretty much before, because as I started to glue on the foam that I had blocked on, it turned out my fabricator had made a choice to change the angles of the signage panel without my permission, which threw off the length of each element. So there was something else to be learned. I should have totally measured it at the site of the fabricator, but they had fabricated armatures for me before without a problem. But this turned out to be a significant problem. But we got it fixed. This was a fun project because I had never used a skyjack before. Each project gives me something else to do. And I also decided that while the outside was my, I hate to say signature, but what I'm known for is like so many happy animals, which was not my intention going from graduate school. So I took the opportunity to do a mosaic design that was that I wanted to be inspired by music because I knew they were having playground instruments, play musical instruments on the playground. So this was to echo that kind of sentiment. That's a little bit of how I make my dreams concrete. Of course, I love the opportunity to help you make your dreams concrete as well. Love teaching the workshops. And I'll just make a quick plug that my new workshops are listed on my website. And I hope many of you I have seen. I've already seen some familiar faces in the participant group. And I hope to see more of you in the future. So thank you for having me.
Hopefully we'll see you soon. Take good care, Sherri.
Thank you, Sherri.
Yeah.